And it is 7 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody joining us via the internet and in person here in class. Today, I have two requests that I've gotten over the last couple of days. So request one is, hey, we got this Christmas tree in the makerspace. Can you do an ornament design class where you design ornaments to go on our Christmas tree? And to that I said, definitely. And then I also got a request that said, hey, we haven't done any CNC stuff in class, and now that you're recording it, I'd like to have a recording that I could refer people to. So we're also going to do that. We're going to try to get two birds stoned at the same time. I think that's the saying. And we're going to do both of those in one class. So today we're going to draw a Christmas ornament. This was the terrible ornament that I drew as kind of preparation for class here, but you see it sitting here on our CNC machine at the other building. We'll make it fancier than just a circle. I'm thinking snowflake is what I'm thinking. But just as a test for myself, I made a little simple design just so I can walk myself through the whole process. And speaking of the entire process, let's get started. So I'm going to start a new document here. Just with my new document, I'm going to go ahead and close this document. And I'm going to go ahead up here to my new design plus button here in Fusion 360 and just start a new design here. And now I've got my design, and we can just start by drawing our Christmas ornament. Like I said, I'm thinking snowflake. So for those of you joining at home, snowflake, I kind of Googled it. Or actually, you know what, let's do this. Let's leave it here, and then I'll show everybody. People, I Googled snowflake, and that's kind of what we're aiming at. You know, these are all six-sided designs. Are snowflakes all six-sided? Mm-hmm. Is that a thing in like nature? Is that why the poles on Neptune are six-sided too? Is it like the same principle?
I don't know.
Anyway, all right.
Probably.
Nature, patterns, all that kind of stuff. So we're gonna design a snowflake. I'll let you like drink these in for a couple of seconds. Well, it's kind of like a weird three-sided, six-sided. There we go. That's what we need right there. Faces. That'll be a pain in the butt to draw. So, you know, we're going to be, you know, more like in this territory or maybe even that territory. So we're going to draw a single branch of our snowflake, and then we'll use a pattern command to make a pattern of that. And then hopefully in the second half of class, we will be getting into CNC talk and setting up some tool paths to machine our snowflake out of our bricks of gold that we have. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start a new sketch in this document. So I'll come up here to the Create menu, and then I'll choose Create Sketch. And I'm just going to go ahead and select one of these planes to draw on. I'm drawing on the front plane right now. You know, I'll mention off the top that when you're going to CNC something is kind of the only time when choosing your drawing plane can make a difference in the steps you have to take later. So there are natural X, Y, and Z axes here. If you look at our navigation cube up at the top right-hand corner, you can see we're drawing between the Z and the X axis right now. It's totally fine. You can still draw on whatever plane you want to, and I'll show you how to work through that in the next step. I'm purposefully doing it in a way that I will have to make extra steps because normally the Z-axis is the top. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're picking any plane to draw on, and we'll cross that bridge later, and maybe I'll reference back to this moment here. So I'm going to start by drawing a circle. So I'm going to grab my circle tool, my center diameter circle tool specifically, and I only want to draw a circle to start off with because I kind of want to define the outside boundaries of my snowflake. For me, it kind of makes sense to, like, how big is my snowflake going to be in total? Maybe like 5 inches is a decent size for a Christmas ornament, good size Christmas ornament. So I'm going to type in 5 inches here and then go ahead and hit enter. And I'm going to change that circle to a construction line. Just because we're only using this as reference. I just want to kind of define a boundary for the outside of my snowflake here. Now I'm going to do one more circle, and that circle is going to be the inside, like the innermost radius of my snowflake here. So I'm going to grab my circle tool one more time. I'll make that circle concentric on the larger circle. Maybe like 1 inch is a decent size. We'll be able to change that later if we want to. Alright, now that we've got kind of the inner ring of our snowflake drawn, we can think about the, let's call them the arms of our snowflake, right? I'm going to go ahead and start by grabbing my line tool, and I'm just going to define a line that goes from the center of our circle all the way out to the outside edge of our largest circle here. I'm dragging this out straight horizontal. I guess this doesn't really matter. You could make this at any angle you want to, because we're eventually going to make a pattern of these things. But I'm going straight out horizontally here. And now we'll need to,
Carl,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Your second circle, was that a construction line or is that a line?
That's a regular line. Yeah, this inner circle is just a solid regular line, not a construction line.
Thank
you. Yeah. And, you know, in order to make the edges of my snowflake, I wonder, gosh, I'm kind of curious. If I just do a couple of things here, I'm kind of curious if this is something I didn't go ahead and do. I wonder if I can use offset. Oh, kind of. I can kind of use offset. Let's try to work that method. So let's define like kind of the basic shape that we want to make of the branches of our snowflake just by adding some additional lines here. So I'm going to grab my line tool and I'm going to draw kind of a line off to an angle like this here, and I'll make kind of a largish line. These are one of those kind of things that I'm just doing by eye, so you don't really have to type in a dimension here, but you certainly can. So if you're getting mathematical about it, this could be like 0.875, this could be like 7/8. I'm only going to draw the lines off of one side of this because I can mirror over this line and make them symmetric. So I don't have to worry about trying to draw another line at this exact angle. Maybe I'll make 3 of these lines here. Something worth noting here, if I make a line like this and I say, oh, you know what, I really like all 3 of these lines to be parallel to each other, I can do that by adding some constraints after the fact. Now, you know, you can draw whatever lines you'd like and make them at whatever angle you want them to be. But if you want to, in this constraints menu here, we can choose this parallel option. And now I can click on the first line and then click on the second line, and that goes ahead and jumps into parallel, and I can even click on the third line, and that'll jump into parallel with that too, which is kind of nice. I can drag these around and move them wherever I need them to be here. In fact, maybe on this bottom, I might regret this later, but maybe I'll have a couple of, just on this bottom most branch here, I'll have another branch that comes off of it. So I'll give you a second to draw that, or draw what your snowflake is going to be. Hey Tom, how you doing? We're doing snowflakes today. Snowflakes slash CNC ornament. So I hope you brought your brick of gold, because we're going to be machining it later. And so the goal, I don't know if you're following along at home, but we've drawn a 5-inch circle that we've turned into a construction line, because we're just using this as a gauge for how, oh, I suppose you can't even see my screen. I'm referencing my screen here. We're just using the circle for a gauge on how wide or how large our snowflake is going to be here. And now we've drawn kind of the basic skeleton. We also have a smaller 1-inch circle in the inside here. And then I've got kind of the skeleton of what my snowflake arm is going to look like here. At least half of my snowflake arm. So once we've got our snowflake arm half drawn, in order to make a duplicate of that over on the other side, we can use our mirror command. So I'm actually going to do this twice, because I want to duplicate this arm of my snowflake arm as well. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my mirror tool from my create menu. So I'll go ahead and click on create, and then come down to mirror. And the object that I'm going to mirror is that little line there. And then I'm going to mirror it over this line right here. And then I'll say OK. So now I've got that mirrored over, and I'm going to do that same operation for all these lines here. So I'll come up to the create menu, I'll scroll down to mirror. I'm going to choose as the objects that I'm mirroring. For me it's 5 objects, but you may have more or less depending on the kind of snowflake you've designed. And then the mirror line is going to be that line that we drew from the center of our circle all the way out to our 5-inch construction circle there. And then I'm going to say OK. Alright, so now comes the fun part, because we've got the basic kind of skeleton of our snowflake arm, but we need to give it some thickness. It needs some mass. These snowflakes they're not 4th dimensional snowflakes that are like folding through the 4th dimension so you can't really see them. They're like regular 3-dimensional snowflakes. So we're going to go and grab our, in order to give these some thickness, we're going to use the offset command. So if I, we're going to use the offset command. Alright, so I'm going to come up to modify and then choose offset. And I'm going to specify, I'm going to start with my individual arms here. So each of my arms, I'm going to click on both of them, and I'm going to offset them a distance of, let's say, is 1/8 of an inch too much? 1/8 of an inch is too much. I think I want these things to be 1/8 of an inch total. So I'm going to offset them a distance of 1/2 of an 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, which is 0.0625. Or, in case you didn't know this, you can type in fractions. So if I want to do 1/16 of an inch, I can just type in 1 over 16, and I'll get a 1/16 of an inch there. And it converts that to a decimal for me. And it knows that I'm working in a document unit of inches here. So that's why that works. Now, I'm going to do that a whole bunch of times because I want this skeleton that we've drawn to represent kind of the center of each one of these arms. So just to illustrate, I'm going to grab my offset tool one more time, except this time I'm going to offset a negative 1/16. And you can see that it's given our arm some thickness here, right? And now in order to cap off the arm at the top here, because right now it's just open, to cap off that arm, you could just draw a line. So I could just take my line tool and I could close off that end. However, I think it would be nice to have these be nice and round. So I'm going to choose in mine to use a special kind of circle. It's a special kind of circle. From the circle command here, we're going to go ahead and grab this 2-point circle. And a 2-point circle will just let us click one time on the one outside edge, and then click a second time on the other outside edge of that, and now we get a fully enclosed shape there that you can see that's nice and filled in there. I'm going to do that to the other side. So I'm going to click and place one side of my circle and click and place the other side of my circle. Now I'm going to go to town and I'm going to do that operation a bunch more times. So for each one of these arms, I will need to offset it twice and then put some circles at the end of it. I leave it up to you if you've got some little branches on your snowflake, if you want to offset those the same distance. So if you want these to be the same thickness as the other branches or not, I leave that in your capable hands. You're making your own snowflake. You're not making my snowflake. You're all special little snowflakes in my book, though. That's the important part. Alright, so 1/16 of an inch. And a negative 1/16 of an inch. Here's one of those occasions where it's like, alright, I know I'm going to be grabbing that 2-point circle command quite often. So if I come up here to this 2-point circle option here, and I choose the little 3 dots next to that option here, so I can click on those little 3 dots that appear when you're hovering over a tool, and I'm going to say pin this to my toolbar, and then it adds an icon right up here at the top. So now I can just click on that icon, and it's real easy for me to do those offsets and add my circles faster. The keyboard shortcut, just in case you are curious, for a offset is the O command. You can bring that to your next Christmas party that you're attending. You know, when you're hanging out at the company Christmas party, talking about keyboard shortcuts, as one does. Does anybody have any questions so far?
I do.
Yeah.
So rather than having to do all of these offsets over and over again, couldn't we have done all of the offsets on one side and then mirrored everything across the
100%.
Okay.
You could, yep, totally. You know, so fantastic point. So we mirrored all this stuff from one side over to the other side, and now we're having to offset twice as many things, literally. So yes, we could have offset all these things first, and that probably would have been the smart way to do things. But I ain't that smart. So, and think about how much practice you're getting now using the offset tool. Like so much. On a scale of 1 to so much practice, you're definitely getting so much. And I just have one final offset and circle to do, and that's for this central shaft that runs down the middle of my snowflake arm here. So that's my last offset. And then I'll check in with you guys, see where you're at with your offset parties. Also kind of curious, I've been learning for another class, for the January class, I think. I think we're going to delve into this surface, making surfaces instead of dealing with the solid environment. And I'm kind of curious now, as I was going through this, how are you guys doing? Are you still making your lines? So I'll just do a little experiment for my own purposes and the enjoyment of people watching at home. There is an option here in the surface environment called thicken, and I'm wondering if we could have used that. So if we've got our little snowflake arm here, and in the surface environment, you can, normally I keep telling people, oh, you gotta have a fully enclosed shape to extrude it. That is not 100% true, because in the surface environment, you can just extrude flat planes, basically. And so here I've extruded these flat planes that is kind of like my branches of my snowflake, right? And I was just thinking, can I use this thicken command now to give it some thickness? Make it symmetric. Sure can. That 100% works. So, there's another way to do this. Now we don't have our filleted edges here, but that's 100% another way to do that. So the way that I did that is I drew my lines, right? I drew my shape, whatever kind of arm you're going to have here, and then I extruded them in the surface workspace. And this is kind of outside the scope of where I was trying to go with class, but I was just kind of curious here. And then I used this thicken option to give them some thickness. So I was able to give some branches of a snowflake some thickness, just like I'm sketching them here, except I didn't have to do any offsets.
Well, but then you totally that would have robbed us of the offsetting.
Yes, we would have not. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I don't rob you on purpose. I only rob you on accident in this class. All right. So we got an arm. Cool. Everybody's good. Mike, you good? Slowly. Should I keep going, or you feel like you're in a good spot? Good-ish spot?
I'm okay.
I have a feeling Mike's drawing a very ambitious snowflake, which I support. All right, cool. So we've got all of the arms of our snowflake drawn, and now I'm going to take a cue here, because we could make a pattern of this drawing and then we'd have a whole lot of stuff that we'd have to go and click on to extrude. But instead, let's just extrude the single arm, and we'll choose to make a pattern of the body instead of make a pattern of all those lines. So let me show you what I mean here. So we're gonna say finish sketch. I've got a sketch that I can name now. This sketch is called Snowflake Arm. And now I'm going to extrude said snowflake arm. So I'll go up here to I'm back in my solid working environment here. So I'll come up here to create and then come down here to extrude. And I'm going to extrude out all these little kibbles and bits here. In fact, you know what? Maybe this is a good opportunity I'm just going to, see, my Fusion does this a lot. If yours does this too, I am never going to choose this method of selecting. It's never going to be a selection option that I choose because it doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like it. So in this select menu here, you can choose a different selection, and like window selection is just objectively better. Feel free to argue with me in the comments. You will be wrong. I can just select everything, all these outside bits here. I don't need to include this circle. However, if I accidentally drag my window over that and have that too, I can just unselect it afterwards. So now I've got all my bits of my snowflake here, and I'm going to extrude them a distance of, let's make it 1/8 of an inch. Seems like a decent sized Christmas ornament thickness. It'll be fine. Alright, cool. So 1/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to say okay. So, and again, we can type in the decimal equivalent there, or I can type in 1/8, and that will get me to the same place. Alright, so now we can make a pattern. We've got a body. I'm actually not going to name this body right away because we're going to end up adding to it. So now we can make a pattern of this body. So we'll go ahead and click on the Create menu and then come down to the Pattern option and then come down to Circular Pattern. Now we want to make a pattern not of a type faces. We want to make a pattern of a type bodies. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that bodies option. I can either choose my body in my bodies folder here in my browser, or I can click on it here in my drawing view. Either one will get me to the same place. And then we're going to choose an axis to revolve that around. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this select button here, and now I can pick one of the circles that I've drawn, or because I've drawn this around my origin here, I can also choose this green axis, runs right up and right through the middle of the circle. Either one of these circles or that green axis will do the job for me. So I'm just going to pick this circle here. And now we've got kind of ghosted out images here, and we've determined that snowflakes come in 6s. So we're going to go ahead and follow the laws of thermodynamics, I guess. Or I guess if it's a Christmas ornament, these follow like Jesus rules. It's Jesus rules. I think you're right. Okay. So quantity is 6. And there we go. So we can see that I've got an issue here, and that issue being the arms of my Christmas tree are, the arms of my snowflake are colliding with each other. And if you're having this problem too, it's a fairly easy problem to solve. So, you know what? I don't even know if I need to go edit my sketch to change them. can I just click and drag on this? Kind of. Not really. So I'm going to go and edit this sketch. And now I go back in time to when I was making this sketch. For some reason I'm looking at the back now. And now I should be able to... I should be able to shorten this. Because I defined a distance there. So, tell you what. One thing you can do, instead of defining this distance, I really just want to be able to click and drag on this thing and move it around. So I'm going to highlight this distance that I wrote in here, and I'm just going to delete it. And now that that's deleted, no, that doesn't want to do that either. Can I drag you in? Do you want to drag in? Not really. So I really need to specify a distance here. Well, that's pretty interesting. So I'm looking at my drawing a little bit closer here. I would expect that these circles that I drew, the center of them would have at the end of the end point of that line that I drew. But they are not, which is kind of interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and add that constraint now after the fact. So I'm going to use a coincident constraint just to... No, it doesn't want to do that. Please try revising dimensions or constraints. It's interesting because you'd think that that would be concentric, but they are not. So, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and, gosh, I guess I'm going to delete those. Because it doesn't really want to let me move them around. Well, that's kind of it. My end circles are constrained, funnily. Or really, none of this is constrained at all. So you can see that my drawing here is completely blue, and blue means it's unconstrained. Maybe these circles, drawing these circles at the end, I think is screwing me up. So I'm going to delete these circles, and I'm going to see if that solves my issue here. Yeah, it's those circles that were giving me grief. So now I can hike those in a little bit. I can move these to whatever position I need them to be here. That's a weird dimension there. Alright, so let me try adding those. You know what, instead of a 2-point circle at the end, let me just do a center diameter circle, because I feel like that's going to do the same thing. I have a center point, and in addition to you know how when you thought the easy part of class turns out to be the most frustrating? Alright. And somehow I lost a line over there. One of my offsets just mysteriously disappeared. This is what happens when you -1/16. This is what happens when you start moving around unconstrained sketches. Alright, so now if I say finish sketch, that kind of worked, only it's missing some things here. And my extrusion, And I'll say okay. There we go. All right, cool. That will do just fine for me, I think. So now we need a central hub here, so I'm just going to go ahead and extrude out this central hub. So I'll go ahead and click on the extrude item one more time. I'll choose that central hub, make it 1/8 of an inch, and when I extrude out this central hub here, I'm going to choose join. And hopefully what that will do is we'll take all these 6 bodies that represent each of the arms of my snowflake here, and it will join them all together as it did into one body. And now that I've got all those things joined into one body, I can name this Snowflake. Alright, cool. So now that we've got a snowflake and we're thinking about making this out of our brick of gold, we should first probably save it. So I'm going to go ahead and choose to save it. I'm going to call this CNC Snowflake. I have a project that I made. This is a habit that I've been trying to form for myself. That I start a new project, so I click here this new project button, and in it each class now has its own project. I leave up to you how you want to organize your Fusion, but for me, because I have several documents that inevitably be part of each class, or sometimes we'll have projects that go multiple weeks and we'll have multiple parts in it, so we have a project name and then all the parts get saved into that. These are kind of like folders, you gotta say. So, alright, so CNC Snowflake, I'm saving it in my Christmas ornaments project. And I'm just gonna go ahead and say save. So, in order to make this, in order to generate the G-code that we need in order to cut this out on one of our CNC machines here at the Makerspace, we'll need to leave our design workspace up here in the top right hand corner. So I'll click on design, and then instead of the design workspace that we're in right now, I'm going to come down here to the manufacture workspace. So if I choose this manufacture workspace here, all of our tools at the top change, so we've got all of our different kinds of tool paths that we can choose to make our snowflake out of. And we've got our browser here, but now our browser doesn't have bodies and sketches. It does. If you spin down this models folder here, and then this is your component, the document component, and then here are our bodies and our sketches buried kind of in there. You probably won't need to look at that a whole lot. The first thing that you will need to do is to generate a setup. So if we click on the setup menu here and choose new setup, a setup is a set of it kind of tells you need to know on your model where the 0, 0, 0 point is that the CNC machine can reference. So one of the things that we're doing here in this setup is that. The other thing that we're doing here in this setup is defining the block of material that you have in order to machine your snowflake out of. So first let's get our 0, 0, 0 point in the right spot. Our origin is what they call that. So this guy right up here. First we need to get this pointed in the right direction. So my z-axis is pointed, I want it to be pointed straight up away from my snowflake here, and it's kind of pointed sideways to it. So in our setup window here, the orientation right now is set to model orientation. So this is kind of what I was talking about when I mentioned which drawing plane you choose when you start Fusion 360. If we would have started drawing this model on the top, then it would have had the z-axis pointed in the right direction, and we wouldn't have need to mess around with this. But it's nice to know that you can change that orientation, because not always all the parts you'll be able to draw in the same orientation. So we're going to change it from model orientation to select z-axis and x-axis, or z-axis slash plane and x-axis, or select z-axis slash plane and y-axis. Either one of these options will work for us. Really, it's the z-axis that we need to choose here. So the z-axis right now is set to nothing. And if I just hover over my model and pick the face of my snowflake here, and I click on that, you can see that my z-axis is now pointed straight up and looking in the right direction. If you want to, you can specify either your x or your y-axis depending on which one of these options you chose. But it is not necessary. As long as you get your z-axis pointed in the right direction, which is up and away from your model, then that is your happy place. Alright, so now we need to get this origin in the right spot on our imaginary stock here that we've got in front of us. So it is possible to locate your milling bit right in the center of a piece of stock. However, it is much easier to locate your milling bit on the side of a piece of stock. So what we want to do is we want to have this origin here be in one of the corners of our stock. So if I just click on the little center point of this origin, now it lights up a whole bunch of other little white dots around our imaginary stock here. And I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to choose the top right corner. Tom is a machinist. He's kind of joining us online here, and this is a rule of thumb that I use. And Tom, I feel like I've asked you if I'm crazy or not before, but I always do this so my origin points away from my material. And the reason I always do this is some machinist here at the Makerspace said this is a good practice to be in, because when you're standing at your machine and you see a negative number on the dial, on your machine dial for whatever axis you're on, you know that you're over the top of your part. If it's a negative number, you're removing things from your part. If it's a positive number, then you're off here in the middle of nowhere somewhere and you're not over the top of your part potentially. So that is a rule of thumb. I think more importantly, just have a strategy for yourself that you just always do, and it'll be easier for you to just pick up this piece of G-code and use it in the future if you want to make the snowflake again. You don't have to remember things. All right. The last thing that we're going to do here in our setup is we've got a tab in our setup window, and the next tab over is our stock. So right now, and the default is the mode is set to a relative size. I would say you should always change this to a fixed size box. And what this means is these are the dimensions of the brick of gold, or your piece of plywood, or your hardwood, or your piece of aluminum, whatever it is you're going to put in the CNC machine. It has dimension. It's got length and width and height or thickness, and you should take that stock and you should measure it, and you should replace those dimensions right here. So if you've got your pieces 7 by 5 and it's just the right thickness, it's 1/8 of an inch in this case, then you should enter in those dimensions and know them and have them. And then your model sits within it, and you're good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Now we have a setup generated. Now we can actually make some tool paths. So this is a really simple shape that we're cutting out. We're only going to need one kind of tool path here, and that is a contour tool path. This is maybe the biggest help that these tooltips in Fusion are in all of Fusion 360. So there you get these pictures with tooltips everywhere in Fusion 360 that you are. However, in my opinion, they are the most useful here in the machining workspace. So the blue lines that you see in these tooltips are the paths that your router or your CNC machine are going to take as they are moving or following the instructions that you're about to give it here. So if you're unsure of how to make a specific how to make the tool do a specific thing, you can hover over these options and go, oh, do I want the tool to, run across the surface all at the same level? Oh, that's a facing operation. Do I want to run around the outside of a part and maybe also the inside of some holes? Well, that's a contour operation. Do I want to make just a groove or a slot right in the middle of a piece of part? Oh, look, there's a slot operation for that. So these tooltips are super handy, and I would encourage you to take a peek and look at them and see if there's one that fits the specific operation that you're trying to achieve. These 2D operations are probably most of what most people will do here at the Makerspace with Fusion. However, there are 3D options too, where you can make all sorts of crazy cool 3D shapes. But right now, like I said, for us, we're just going to use this contour option. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this 2D contour. Now we get into a complicated area here. So I was asked to do this class so we'd have to do CNC stuff, so we'd have this recorded. And traditionally in this class, I don't talk about feeds and speeds. And that is going to be especially true now that this is being recorded for YouTube. The reason I don't talk about feeds and speeds, when I say feeds and speeds, what I mean is how fast is your spindle going around and how fast is it moving across your work surface, how fast is it cutting, basically. The reason I don't talk about feeds and speeds is because I don't know what you're cutting into, I don't know what you're cutting with, and I don't know your tool, I don't know the machine, I don't know the material, I don't know a lot of things, and all those things are important when you are generating these numbers. However, and I don't want somebody to cut something out here with the Makerspace and be like, oh, well, I watched the YouTube video where Carl was talking about it, and he said to set it at 40 inches a minute. So that's what I did, and then I broke the Tormach. So I did not say that, just for the record, I did not say that. What I am saying you should do is you should go to the Google, and you should look up a nice feed and speed calculator. Tom, do you have a feed and speed calculator that you like to use online? Oh, okay, cool. Machinist Handbook. All right. So here you go. So you should go online to Amazon, and you should buy yourself a copy of the Machinist Handbook. So, I'm sure there's a lot of great reference in here. If you want to get into CNC machining, this is a book that you will hear people reference. It will probably be full of information and well worth $52. However, if you just want to make a couple of cuts, you can look up feed and speed calculators, and you can find websites that will give you information and talk about, you'll enter in stuff like the number of flutes on your cutting bit and the spindle speed of your routers. So some of our routers will go to a faster speed than others, so that'll be something you'll have to factor into this calculation here. And once you do your research and get your feeds and speeds right, then you'll take those numbers and you'll you'll modify them here. So I will say that Fusion does a decent job of getting these numbers to be pretty close. And the way that you do that is by first selecting the tool. So if we come up here in our contour menu, the very first tab is our tool menu. If I click on this little select button, we're probably going to run a couple of minutes over if that's okay with everybody. So I'm going to come down here to my Fusion 360 library, and I'm going to come down here to Sample Tools Inch, and now I'm going to pick out a tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just pick out 1/8 of an inch flat end mill here. Now this has some properties associated with it, so it knows how long, how wide the mill is. It knows the shoulder length. I believe it tells it how many flutes. Here's the number of flutes is 3. So you know, this is some of the information that you would get from that feed and speed calculator that's kind of associated with this tool. If you happen to have a 3-flute end mill that's 1/8 of an inch, then this is a good tool to choose. And the other new thing where is that? Where's the new option? Why isn't it letting me pick? Oh, here we go. Here's this preset here. So this is a fairly recent addition here. So these presets give you a pretty decent approximation of an okay feed and speed. So you know, here are aluminum, there's brass, there's copper, there's various kinds of steel and plastic. Wood is not listed here, so you're on your own as far as that goes. But like, for example, if we were cutting this out of aluminum and you know, we're just roughing this out right now, then this is a decent starting point, assuming you have a spindle that'll go 1200 RPM. But again, you know, do your research on your feed and speed, look up a good calculator. And now that I've said my disclaimer, we're going to move on to geometry. All right. So the main thing that we need to pick in this geometry tab here is we need to specify the bottom side. Oh, it's not going to make me. Why is it? It should let me pick the whole thing all at once, but it is not, because reasons. I should be able to just pick all these lines all at once. When I did my test before class, I just picked it all at once, and normally you just pick them all at once. Did I not specify my model properly? Yeah. In my setup here. Yeah, I've got the body selected there. I got my tool. Now the geometry, that is really frustrating. I guess I'm going to have to go in and specify each one of these lines. It didn't used to be like that. I don't know why it's like that. That's going to take forever, isn't it? I wonder if I can look at a side view and do a box selection. We can't do a box selection. Gosh, that's frustrating. Yeah, so I guess we're going to have to go in and pick every one of these lines here, and then these arrows are going to get in the way, and it's going to make you zoom in and out. And if you've got a complicated yeah, I can't click on the surface at all. It won't let me click. Yeah, no, it's not letting me do that at all. I mean, in my other document, which I closed. In my other document, which is a much simpler design, however, when I say, hey, make me a 2D contour, see, I just hover over it and it lets me pick the whole thing at once. Which is real weird. Why is it? What's that, Tom?
Your lines were trimmed. 2 corners from the Snowflake round, these individual lines all over the place.
Oh, you think because I made them with individual lines, because of my drawing was made with individual lines?
Well, where you've got the lines that cross over, they're not trimmed to a point. Yes, sir.
Well, that means this is going to take. I wonder if I select this first. See, here it says. It's actually this one that I want to choose. Yeah, that's a pain in the butt. So I'm, and it won't let me pick that at all. All right, well, so we're coming up on 8 o'clock here. We're gonna have to pick this up next week here, because Fusion is not liking my drawing. I did something wrong here, and I'm gonna have to do some research on why this is doing this like this, because it should just automatically select the entire thing. I wonder, let me try one more little trick here. So now, there we go. That's a pain in the butt. So what I did was, here I'm able to select it all now as one profile, and yeah. And the way that I did it was I had to make a sketch that was just all those lines. So what I did is I created a new sketch in the location that I wanted to, which is the back surface of my snowflake here. And then on this sketch, I just did a project of this body, and then said OK. So now I have a sketch that is just the outline of all these contours here. And now that I have that sketch made over in the manufacturer workspace here, now I've got in my geometry tab here, now I can spin around so I can see that sketch. Look at that, it's doing it again. It's not letting me, it just let me select it. You saw me do it, it's recorded and everything. So, do I have to find the sketch here? There we go. I can click on the sketch over in the sketches folder, and that's the geometry that I want to define. The other thing that we want to do here before we wrap up is I'd like to hold this down with tabs, so you can have it make a little tab every once in a while, because otherwise if it cuts your part out completely, it's just kind of flapping in the breeze and ends up causing problems in the CNC machine. So we can give it some tabs. And then the other thing that we're going to make sure we do here is in the passes section, I'm going to come down here to this multiple depths option. And now here's a feed and speed thing and a thing with your whatever mill you're using. But in general, you want the step down that your bit goes into your... Here, if I just hover over this, there's a great tool tip here. So you can see we don't want to go all the way to the bottom of our part and start milling that out. We want to just go part way into our material and start milling it out. So you want to set a depth for your thing to go down, for your machine, for your tool to go down. And now this will probably do a better job of illustrating what that looks like once it generates this tool path. Here it's only at 4.3%. Come on, computer, you can do it. But in theory, it will generate a tool path. It's giving me some sort of weird error. Failed to generate. So, option number 2 here is if you're having problems making this, if I go back to my design workspace, here's that projected sketch that I made. If I right click on it, I can say save this as a DXF, and then I can take this right to a laser and cut it out on the laser. And until next week, I will figure out why it's giving me these errors. So that'll be it for today. Tom, I may confer with you at some point and see if you have any idea why it's giving me an error. It's not that complicated. Generate failed to generate passes. I mean, maybe it's because I got a lot of corners here and it doesn't like these corners, because obviously your round bit can't get in those corners, but I'll have to do some experimenting and see why it's not working. All right. So that's all for today. We will see you next week. All right, thanks. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Adam. Good to see y'all here.
Good to see you too.